Before we step into the twilight of 1960, a reminder. The following account involves a real-world tragedy and graphic forensic details. The names and events are real, but the theories explored, specifically those regarding living individuals, are based on historical legal proceedings and do not represent a final judgment of guilt. Listener discretion is advised for your own peace of mind. A tent is a fragile thing. The Shroud of Lake Bodom, the White Night Massacre. A tent is a fragile thing. It's a psychological security blanket made of fabric and hope. We zip ourselves inside and believe we've built a fortress. But to the outside world, you're just a silhouette against a thin wall of nylon. You're a shape. You're a target. On June 5th, 1960, on the shores of Lake Bodom in Finland, 4 teenagers learned that the only thing a tent is truly good for is keeping the blood inside. Tonight, we aren't just looking at a cold case. We are looking at the foundational myth of Finnish horror. This is a story of white nights, those strange summer evenings where the sun barely dips below the horizon, creating a perpetual, ghostly twilight. It's a story of a killer who didn't wait for the dark, because in Finland in June, the dark never comes. They simply waited for the silence. Grab your tea, check the window locks. This is the deep dive into the Lake Bodom murders. To understand the tragedy of Lake Bodom, you first have to understand the geography of the Finnish soul. In the summer of 1960, Finland was a nation vibrating with a fragile, newfound optimism. The scars of the Winter War and the Continuation War were beginning to scab over. A new generation, the motorbike generation, was coming of age. These were kids who didn't want to talk about trenches or reparations. They wanted rock and roll, they wanted leather jackets, and they wanted the freedom of the open road. On June the 4th, 1960, 4 such teenagers set out from the suburbs of Helsinki. They were 18-year-old Nils Wilhelm Gustafsson, his best friend Seppo and Tero Boisman, and their girlfriends Miley Imle Björklund and Anja Tulikki Maki, both just 15 years old. They represented the peak of Finnish youth, healthy, adventurous, and blissfully unaware that they were riding directly into the mouth of a national nightmare. They chose a spot on the Oita Peninsula, a finger of land poking into the dark, cold waters of Lake Bodom. In Finland, June brings the white night. It is a time when the sun refuses to fully surrender to the horizon. The sky remains a bruised, ethereal violet grey, creating a world of perpetual twilight where shadows don't just hide, they linger. It is an atmospheric anomaly that feels like a dream. But as these 4 would discover, a dream can easily be flayed into a haunting. They pitched their tent, a heavy mid-century canvas model, on a small elevated ridge. They parked their motorbikes, shared a few drinks, and enjoyed the surreal glow of the midnight sun. By all accounts, the evening was perfect. They were young, they were in love, and they were alone in the cradle of nature. But the Oita Peninsula wasn't as empty as they believed. Somewhere in the tree line, someone was watching the silhouettes against the canvas. Someone was waiting for the laughter to die down and the rhythmic breathing of sleep to begin. The attack began between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. on June the 5th. This is the dead zone of the white night, the time when the birds have started their morning chorus, but the human world is still lost in the heavy fog of deep sleep. What makes the Lake Bodom murders so singularly terrifying is the mechanics of the assault. Most killers seek entry. They want to penetrate the sanctuary. The Bodom killer, however, treated the tent like a trap, using a heavy, blunt object likely a rock wrapped in cloth, and a long, sharp knife. The assailant attacked the teenagers through the fabric of the tent. They didn't unzip the door. They didn't announce their presence. They simply began to strike the shapes moving beneath the canvas. The first blow likely collapsed the main support pole, causing the heavy rain-slicked canvas to fall directly onto the 4 teenagers. In an instant, their sanctuary became a shroud. They were shrink-wrapped in their own home, unable to see their attacker, unable to find the exit, and unable to defend themselves as the blade and the stone began to rain down. The killer's efficiency was chilling. Marley Bjorklund suffered the most horrific fate. She was positioned in the middle of the tent. The killer focused a frantic, ritualistic rage on her, stabbing her multiple times even after she had ceased to breathe. This is what profilers call overkill, a phenomenon often linked to a deep-seated personal resentment or a severe psychiatric break. Seppo Boisman and Anja Maki were bludgeoned and stabbed with efficient, brutal force. They died where they lay, trapped in the folds of the canvas. Niels Gustafsson was the anomaly. He was struck with a devastating blow to the face that shattered his jaw and crushed his facial bones. He was left for dead, slumped over the exterior of the collapsed tent. His blood mingled with the dew on the fabric. The killer then did something that has baffled investigators for 60 years. They didn't just flee. They stayed. They performed a series of bizarre, post-mortem tasks. They sorted through the teenagers' belongings. They stole their wallets and some clothing, but left the valuable motorbikes untouched. Most strangely, they took the victims' shoes. At 6 a.m., 2 young birdwatchers, kids really, were walking near the peninsula. From about 150 meters away, they saw the collapsed tent. They saw a man walking away, heading toward the woods. He was fair-haired, dressed in light-colored clothing. They didn't see the blood. They didn't see the bodies. They assumed it was just a camper, packing up early and moving on. They didn't know they were looking at the silhouette of a mass murderer. It wasn't until 11 a.m. that a local swimmer named Esko Johannesson stumbled upon the scene. What he saw was a tableau of carnage that would break the collective psyche of the nation. Niels Gustafsson was moving, moaning, barely conscious, his face a mask of purple bruises and broken bone. Beneath him, the tent was a patchwork of red and grey. When the police arrived, they didn't just fail, they committed forensic suicide. Finland in 1960 did not have a specialized homicide squad for cases of this magnitude. The local police allowed curious onlookers to walk right through the crime scene. Journalists were permitted to photograph the bodies before they were even moved. The motorbike generation of the town arrived to see the bikes of their fallen peers, trampling over any footprints the killers might have left in the soft lakeside mud. The murder weapons, the knife and the heavy stone, were never found. They were likely cast into the depths of Lake Bodom, which reaches depths of over 12 meters in parts, or buried in the endless, unforgiving Finnish forest. The investigation was blind from the first hour. They had a survivor who couldn't remember, 3 dead teenagers, and a nation demanding blood. If this were a spy novel, we would look no further than Hans Assmann. Assmann is one of the most enigmatic figures in 20th century criminal history, a German national who had reportedly served in the SS during the war and was rumored to be an agent for the KGB. Assmann lived a life that felt like a series of coded messages. On June 6, 1960, the day after the massacre, Assmann walked into the Helsinki Surgical Hospital. He wasn't there for a checkup. He arrived looking like a man who had crawled out of a grave. A young doctor at the time, Jormo Paulo, was the one who treated Assmann. He would later write extensively about his encounter, and his notes are chilling. Assmann's fingernails were black with dirt and what appeared to be dried blood. His clothing was stained. He was acting strange, performative aggression, feigning a fever, and a lack of coordination to secure a bed in the ward. When the doctors alerted the police, their reaction was Nothing. The police arrived, spoke to Assman briefly, and then left. They claimed he had an alibi, that he was with his girlfriend at the time of the murders. But here is where it gets critical. Assman's alibi was never thoroughly vetted. His girlfriend was terrified of him. Dr. Palo remained convinced until his death in 2006 that Assman was the Bodom killer. He believed the Finnish authorities covered it up because of Assman's alleged ties to Soviet intelligence. In the geopolitical landscape of 1960, the last thing Finland wanted was to accuse a Soviet spy of slaughtering 4 teenagers. While Hans Assman represented the shadowy world of international intrigue, Karl Vladimir Glystrom represented something far more domestic and far more visceral, unhinged, territorial rage. Glystrom, known locally as the Kiosk Man, owned a small refreshment stand near the Lake Bodom camping grounds. He was a man defined by his hatred of the modern youth. He viewed the Oita Peninsula as his personal domain, and he viewed campers as vermin. Glystrom's history with campers wasn't just a series of crumbles, it was a record of violence. He had been caught numerous times throwing rocks at tents in the middle of the night. He had been seen cutting the guy lines of tents while teenagers slept inside. He wanted them gone, and he wanted them to be afraid. On the morning of June 5th, a neighbor saw Glystrom in his yard. He was filling a large, deep hole. When the neighbor asked what he was doing, Glystrom's response was a dark, dismissive snarl. But the most damning piece of Glystrom's puzzle came years later. In 1969, Glystrom reportedly made a deathbed confession. He told a friend, quite simply, "I did it." Shortly after, he walked into the waters of Lake Bodom and drowned himself. He didn't want to face the judge. He wanted to return to the lake that had claimed his sanity. The police at the time ruled Glystrom out because his wife gave him an alibi. She swore he was in bed with her all night, but years after Glystrom's death, she retracted it. She admitted she had lied out of pure, unadulterated fear. For over 4 decades, the Lake Bodom case was the black hole of Finnish crime. It became the foundation of modern Finnish folklore. It inspired the world-renowned melodic death metal band Children of Bodom, who used the Reaper of Lake Bodom as their mascot. The case was everywhere, and yet it was nowhere. It was a ghost story with no ending. Nils Gustafsson, the survivor, lived a quiet, uneventful life. He worked as a bus driver, he got married, he raised a family. He was the boy who lived, the one who saw the glowing eyes and survived the strike. But science was evolving in the background. While Nils was driving his bus through the streets of Helsinki, the world of forensic was undergoing a digital and biological revolution. DNA profiling, bloodstain pattern analysis (BPA), and advanced metallurgy were transforming cold evidence into hot leads. In 2004, the Finnish National Bureau of Investigation, KRP, decided that the silence had lasted long enough. They went back to the evidence lockers, they pulled out the bloodstained motorbikes, they pulled out the shredded canvas of the tent, and then they pulled out the shoes. In March 2004, the Finnish public were rocked. Nils Gustafsson, now 62 years old, was arrested for the murders of his 3 friends and his girlfriend. The prosecution's theory was a complete reversal of 40 years of history. They didn't see a victim, they saw a jealous, rejected young man who snapped. According to the state, a fight broke out that night. Perhaps Seppo and Nils had too much to drink. Perhaps there was a disagreement over the girls. The theory was that Nils was kicked out of the tent or left in a huff, and returned in a blind, narcissistic rage. They argued that Nils used his own heavy-duty boots to stomp on his friends through the tent. They argued that he stabbed them, then realized the magnitude of what he'd done. Then the performance began. The most critical part of the 2004 trial was the bloodstain pattern analysis on Nils's shoes. The one found hidden in the bush 500 meters away. The shoes were covered in the blood of the 3 victims. Crucially, there was no blood inside the shoes, where a foot would be, and there was a void on the outside that suggested someone was wearing them while the blood was spraying from the victims. The prosecution argued Niels hid them himself to hide the evidence of the void and the spray patterns. The trial lasted for months. It was a media circus. Every day, the aging bus driver walked into court, his face a mask of stoic silence. He never broke. He never confessed. He maintained the same story he told as a bloodied 18-year-old in a hospital bed. I don't remember. I saw the eyes. I woke up here. In October 2005, the Espoo District Court delivered its verdict. Acquitted. The court ruled that the prosecution had failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Niels was the killer. The DNA evidence was inconclusive. The blood on the shoes could have ended up there in a dozen different ways during a chaotic struggle. There was no motive, there was no murder weapon, and most importantly, the severity of Niels' injuries made the prosecution's timeline almost impossible. Niels walked free, and the Finnish government even had to pay him a substantial sum in damages. But where does that leave us? We are left with the most terrifying prospect of all, the random predatory event. In the world of true crime, we're fascinated by motives, by grudges, and rejection narratives, but sometimes the monster is just a monster. If we're able to truly be critical of the 1960 investigation, we have to look at the fifth person theory. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, the narrative was simple. 4 kids went in, 3 died, 1 survived. But what if the math was wrong from the start? The 2 birdwatchers were merely children themselves at the time, provided a testimony that has remained the most consistent thorn in the side of any theory involving Niels Gustafsson. They were approximately 150 meters away from when they saw the collapsed tent. They didn't see a struggle. They saw a man walking away. The man they described was fair-haired, wearing light-colored trousers and a dark jacket. He wasn't staggering like a man whose jaw had just been shattered. He wasn't covered in the obvious drenched gore one would expect from a close-quarter axe massacre. He was walking briskly and with purpose. For decades, investigators wondered if this was a 5th member of the party, perhaps someone who had joined them late or a local who had been invited to the campfire, but no one ever came forward. In 2004, the birdwatchers were brought back to the stand, under the harsh lights of a modern courtroom. They were asked if the man they saw leaving the peninsula was Niels Gustafsson. Their answer was a resounding no. This leaves us with a terrifying gap. If a man was seen leaving the site at 6 a.m. and Niels was found collapsed on the tent at 11 a.m., who was the man in the light trousers? If it was the killer, why was he so calm? This points to a predator who didn't just kill, he finished. He stayed until the sun was up, watched the birdwatchers from the tree line, and then simply walked out of the crime scene and into the annals of myth. Let's talk about the tent itself. To a layperson, it's a piece of trash found at a crime scene. To a forensic scientist, it is a 3D map of a massacre. In the 2004 trial, the tent was the star witness. Let's look at the bloodstain patterns. Using modern luminal and blood spatter analysis, the KRP, National Bureau of Investigation, was able to reconstruct the position of every person inside that tent during the attack. What they found was a slaughterhouse geometry. The void effect that we discussed previously, well, there were specific areas on the outside of the canvas that were clean, despite being surrounded by high-velocity blood spray. This indicates that something or someone was standing in front of those sections, blocking the spray. The prosecution argued this was Niels wearing his shoes, standing over his friends. The directionality, the tears in the fabric were analyzed for pull and friction. The analysis suggested that the knife was being used with downward, heavy strokes from the outside of the tent. However, the defense raised a critical common sense point. If Niels was the killer, how did he manage to sustain his own injuries? The prosecution suggested he hit himself with a rock or engaged in a struggle with Seppo. But the forensic doctors testified that the force required to break a jaw in multiple places is almost impossible to self-inflict with a rock while also maintaining the motor skills to hide shoes and perform a meticulous cleanup. The tent tells us that the attack was external. It tells us that the victims were trapped, but it refuses to tell us the name of the hand holding the knife. We cannot discuss Bodom without returning to the spy in the room, Hans Assmann. The theory that the Finnish police protected Assmann isn't just a conspiracy theory, it is rooted in the geopolitical reality of Finlandization. During the 1950s and 60s, Finland existed in a delicate balance between the West and the Soviet Union. To accuse a man with Soviet ties of a high-profile massacre could have had catastrophic diplomatic consequences. The Kyllikkisaari connection. Assmann's name is a recurring nightmare in Finnish cold cases. In 1953, a girl named Kyllikkisaari disappeared while biking home from a prayer meeting. Her body was found months later, buried in a bog. One of her shoes had been removed and tucked into a nearby bush. The exact same signature found at Lake Bodom. Assmann lived in the area of Sari's disappearance. He lived in the area of Lake Bodom. He lived in the area of the Tulilihati camping murders in 1959. Wherever there was a ritualistic outdoor murder involving the hiding of victims' items, Assmann's shadow was there. Is it possible that Finland had a prolific, protected serial killer? A man who knew that as long as he remained useful to certain agencies, the local police would look the other way? The medical staff at the Helsinki hospital never forgot him. They described him not as a patient, but as a predator in a gown. As a researcher, you have to look at the environment. The White Knight isn't just a backdrop, it's a weapon too. In total darkness, a killer is limited by what they can see. In the White Knight scenario, the killer has a tactical advantage. They can see the silhouette of their victims through the canvas. They can see the layout of the campsite. They can see the faces of the people they are killing. But for the victims, the twilight is disorientating. When you are woken up from a deep sleep in a world that is neither day or night, your brain struggles to find its footing. This might explain why Niels Gustafsson saw glowing guys. In that surreal purple-grey light, the reflection of a flashlight or the glint of a blade can look supernatural. This environment creates a dream state that the killer used to their advantage. They didn't have to worry about a flashlight giving them away. They could move through the woods with the confidence of someone walking in high noon, while their victims were still lost in the fog of 4 a.m. Lake Bodom didn't just end with the acquittal of Niels Gustafsson, it transformed. It became a piece of the global heavy metal aesthetic. When the band Children of Bodom, originally Unearthed, took their name, they weren't just picking something edgy, they were tapping into a national trauma. Their lyrics, their mascot, the Reaper, and their overall vibe were built on the idea that the Oita Peninsula is a place where death is permanent, but the mystery is eternal. For the families of Maili, Seppo, and Anja, this cultural legacy is a double-edged sword. On one hand, their loved ones are never forgotten. On the other, they are forever linked to a ghoul and a fable. The reality of their lives, the teenagers who loved motorbikes and rock and roll, has been buried under 60 years of Reaper imagery. If you look at the evidence critically, though, we are left with a few undeniable truths. The attack was external. The tent was the cage, not the weapon. The killer was patient. They waited for the dead zone of the morning. The signature was ritualistic. The hiding of the shoes is the key. Whether it was the unhinged local Gilstrom, the protected spy Assmann, or a phantom we have yet to name, Bodom's killer was a master of psychological and physical terrain. They understood that in the White Knight, you don't need a shadow to hide. You just need the silence of the lake. I want you to think about that peninsula. It's still there. You can go there today. You can stand on the same ridge where the tent was pitched. The water still laps against the shore. The birds still sing at 4 a.m. And somewhere in the deep silence of the Finnish woods, the truth is still tucked into a bush waiting to be found. To understand why Bodom murders remain unsolved, we also must peer into the smoke-filled rooms of the 1960s Finnish police force. The lead investigator was a man named Arvi Vainio, a seasoned detective who was suddenly thrust into the most high-profile case in Scandinavian history. But Vainio wasn't working with a modern CSI kit. He was working with a notepad and a camera and a force that was utterly unprepared for a predatory massacre. In 1960, Finland was a high-trust society. Crime was usually a matter of drunken brawls or domestic disputes. The idea of a stranger stalking a campsite was so foreign that the initial response was one of confusion rather than forensic precision. When the police arrived at the Oita Peninsula, they didn't see a crime scene to be preserved. They saw a tragedy to be processed. This lack of investigative distance is a recurring theme in the history of the case. The first 24 hours are the golden hours of any homicide investigation. At Lake Bodom, those hours were spent in a state of chaotic negligence because the police didn't immediately cordon off the peninsula. The very ground that held the killer's footprints became a public walkway. We have reports of local teenagers, friends of the victims, arriving on their own motorbikes to see if they could help. They walked exactly where the killer would have fled. Venjo and his team focused heavily on the motorbikes. They were parked neatly, almost defiantly, next to the collapsed tent. The keys were gone. The killer had taken the keys, the wallets and the shoes, but left the machines. To Venjo, this suggested a killer who wasn't looking for profit but for power. A thief takes the bike. A monster, a creature, takes the soul. If we apply modern criminal profiling, the kind used by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, to the Bodom killer, a terrifying profile begins to emerge. We have to look at two specific behaviors: overkill and depersonalization. Meili, the 15-year-old girlfriend of Nils, was the primary target of the killer's rage. She wasn't just killed, she was decimated. The autopsies show that she had been stabbed through the tent fabric dozens of times. In profiling, this level of frenzied attack usually indicates a disorganized killer who has a personal, deep-seated resentment toward the victim. This is the strongest piece of evidence against Nils Kristofferson, the idea that a jealous boyfriend snapped. But there is another side to this. By attacking through the tent, the killer was depersonalizing the victims. They weren't people, they were shapes moving under a canvas shroud to the killer. This allowed the killer to maintain a distance from the humanity of the teenagers while still inflicting maximum damage. This behavior is common in mission-oriented killers, people like the kiosk man, Gilstrom, who view the campers not as humans but as infestations to be cleared from his land. And then the shoes. Why hide them? Why tuck them into a bush 500 meters away? The tactical theory is the killer took them so the victims couldn't chase them. Unlikely given they were dead. Trophy theory. The killer intended to take them as a prize but spooked. Forensic theory. The killer was wearing one of the pair's, Nils's shoes, to hide their own footprints, then ditch them when they reached the safety of the woods. The hiding of the shoes suggested a high level of post-offense processing. The killer wasn't just running in a blind panic, they were thinking about the after. They were managing the scene even as the sun began to rise. The Lake Bodom murders didn't just happen at the lake, they happened in the headlines. Across two distinct eras, 1960 and 2004, the Finnish media played a massive role in shaping the truth of the case. In the 1960s, the Finnish press treated the Bodom murders like a gothic horror serial. They published gruesome photos of the tent and the bloodstained motorbikes. They interviewed Nils in the hospital bed while he was still drifting in and out of consciousness. This created a national haunting. Every fair-haired man in Finland became a suspect in the eyes of the public. This media pressure forced the police to act quickly, which often led to the pursuit of weak leads and the protection of figures like Hans Assmann, whose involvement would have been too messy for the headlines. When Nils was arrested in 2004, the media didn't just report the news. They conducted a digital trial. Every leak from the KRP, the National Bureau of Investigation, was treated as gospel. The public saw the 62-year-old bus driver and, influenced by the media's focus on the new DNA evidence, decided he was guilty before the first gavel fell. This created a guilty until proven atmosphere that made the eventual acquittal even more shocking to the Finnish public. The media turned a forensic puzzle into a morality play. Nils wasn't just a defendant, he was the ghost of the lake, finally brought to justice. When he walked free, the media had to pivot, creating a new fable about the fallibility of modern science. We often overlook the motorbikes in this story as well. They are the silent observers of the massacre. The red and white Rambler was Nils's pride and joy. It represented his status, his freedom, and his adulthood. The fact that the killer left the motorbikes untouched is one of the most significant non-events in the case. In most 1960s robberies, a motorbike would be a high-value target. It's easy to move, easy to sell, and provides a quick getaway. By leaving them, the killer proved that this was not a crime of opportunity, it was a crime of intent. The killer took the keys, however. Think about that. Really think about that. They reached into the pocket of the dead or dying teenagers, found the keys and took them. Why? To ensure that even if someone survived, they couldn't leave. It was an act of total enclosure. The killer wanted the teenagers trapped on that peninsula even after the work was done. The motorbike sat there for hours, their chrome reflecting the white night sun, while Niels lay dying on the canvas and his friend lay dead beneath it. They are the only witnesses that haven't changed their story in 60 years. Imagine living for 40 years with the weight of a massacre on your shoulders, not because you did it, but because you survived it. After his recovery in 1960, Niels Kristofferson didn't flee the country. He didn't change his name, he stayed in the Helsinki area. But Niels lived in a state of perpetual suspicion. In every small town and city in Finland, people knew his face. They knew he was the boy from the lake. He had to endure the whispers, the stares, and the constant theories. When he was arrested in 2004, the most common question was, how could a mass murderer drive a bus for 40 years without snapping again? The prosecution argued that the Bodom murders were a one-off event of teenage passion. The defense argued that Niels' life of quiet and dedicated service was proof of his character. Niels' life is a testament to the black hole of an unsolved case. You don't just lose your friends, you lose yourself. You become a character in someone else's story. The 2004 trial of Niels Kristofferson was built entirely on the back of the DNA revolution. The KRP believed that the blood on the shoes was the smoking gun. But there was numerous issues with this evidence. Contamination. The shoes hadn't been stored in sterile conditions in 1960. They had been handled by dozens of people. The transfer theory, the blood could have ended up on the shoes if Niels was struggling with the killer, or if he stumbled over his friend after being hit. And the absence of DNA, while there was blood on the outside, there was no DNA from the victims inside the tent's fabric in a way that proved Niels was the one doing the stabbing. In the end, the court found that possibility is not proof. The DNA didn't name the killer. It only confirmed that the scene was a bloody mess. The scientific miracle that the police had hoped for turned out to be a forensic mirage. Over the years, there have been numerous reports of a blonde man seen standing near the tree line at 4 a.m. Urban legends say that if you pitch a tent on the exact spot where the 1960 massacre occurred, you'll hear the sound of a motorbike that never arrives. These legends are a way for the public to process the lack of closure. When the law fails to provide an answer, the human mind creates a fable to fill the void. The Reaper isn't a ghost. He is the manifestation of an unsolved crime. He is the reminder that the White Knight still hides its secrets. My gut as the tale teller, as a man who has spent years in the rafters of history, reviewing true crime, reviewing horror stories in general, tells me that the answer probably lies in the shoes. The ritual of hiding those shoes is possibly the only key and the only thing on the killer's mind. It was a move of someone who viewed the act of murder as a performance to be managed. Whether it was Gilstrom in a fit of territorial madness or a phantom passing through, the Bodom killer achieved the ultimate outcome that they desired. They became a ghost. They walked into the twilight of 1960 and never truly came back. Miley, Ancha, and Seppa remained teenagers forever, 15 and 18. Frozen in a summer that never ended. And we remain here talking about them, ensuring that their names are louder than the silence of the lake. Keep your digital footprint secure. Check your tent zippers. The world is full of ghosts and not all of them are dead. I am the tale teller and this has been the definitive account of the Lake Bodom murders. Now I want to thank the legends that support me directly. A monumental, earth-shaking thank you to my Ode Night Tea Titan, Matto Star.
Matto Star!
An absolute paragon of friendship and support. Matto, your support is the bedrock of this podcast. You've been here through the deep dives, the live research, and the long nights where the mysteries seem to stare right back at me. Matto, I have to ask you, in a case like Bodom, where the politics of the era might have shielded a monster like Hans Assmann, do you think justice was sacrificed on the altar of national security? Or are we just looking for a grand conspiracy to explain a much simpler, more domestic evil? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the Ode Night to Titans quarters. Thank you, man, for your awesome friendship and support, and have a brilliant week ahead. You're a freaking superstar. Now I want to thank my White Tea Warlords. I want to sharpen my blade for those legends. You are 3 in number, the vanguard of the community, and your insights often cut right through the bone of these cases. Lezosaurus Rex, my wonderful White Tea Warlord. The brutality of the overkill in this case is staggering. Leza, from your perspective, does that kind of frenzied violence point more toward a snap judgment from someone within the group, or the pent-up territorial madness of a man like Dahlstrom? And thank you, Leza, for your amazing support. Please do another 10 reps of your hardest gym exercise just for my silly self, and have a fantastic week, mate. Maya, the Queen of Cats, my next White Tea Warlord. You have an intuition for the predatory nature of these stories. The glowing eyes mentioned by Nils. Is that a trauma-induced hallucination? Or do you think there's a grain of truth to the idea that something truly monstrous was watching the tree line? And thank you, Maya, for your ongoing support as well. You're awesome. And Sangeetha the Seer, you see the patterns that others miss. Looking at the 44-year gap between the crime and the trial, do you believe the void in the forensic evidence was a failure of science? Or is it simply that some secrets are meant to be kept by the lake? Thank you so much, Sangeetha, for your support, and have an epic week as well. Now, you absolute legends, my White Tea Warlords, thank you for supporting me in the way you do. And to my colossal friendo, Matto Star, my Ode Night Tea Titan, again, thank you for your legendary support and friendship. You superstars all put a pep in my step, and I am so grateful. And to my Earl Grey enforcers and all tiers thereafter, the rank and file who keep the gates locked and the digital footprint secure, you are the backbone of the Enforcers Guild. I want to use this time to thank you, absolute legends. I am lucky to have Chad Warren, Peter Raffaelli, Just Heather, Juicebox Andy, Divided by Zero, Paige Kramer, Kimberly Susan Fletcher, Jane Gumnick, Michael Krupp, and Steve the Creeper. Thank you so much for your support. Absolute superstars. And if you want to join these ranks, head on over to Patreon or email me directly if you've got any questions. I am constantly deconstructing these cases in real time, and there's always a seat by the campfire for one more truth seeker. Make sure you're following me on any of your podcast platforms, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, for example. And if you want to get the latest updates on my episodes, feel free to follow me on X as well for a episode feed. I am your tellteller, and this has been the Shroud of Lake Bodom. Stay vigilant and stay safe. See you next week, Sunday, for more true crime.